Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University, and welcome to the first week in the art portion of our course, Integrating the Arts at Misericordia University. During this week's class, let's take a look at the importance of teaching art and also the principles and the elements of art. As part of this week's class, in this video, we're going to consider the importance of teaching art. Then we're going to focus in on the elements and also the principles of art. One of those elements that's very important is color. So we're going to focus very specifically then on the basics of color. And then we're going to finish this video by considering how and why to expose children to fine art. Then in our face-to-face class this week, we're going to engage in hands-on art activities. So we're going to take the content that we learned through the video, and then we're going to apply it in a hands-on fashion. Let's begin by exploring the importance of teaching art. When you consider it, the visual arts are absolutely basic to humankind. We see art in some form existing in all cultures, dating back to the prehistoric times to the oldest civilizations that we can find traces of. When you think about it, the arts allow us to decorate, to express, to communicate, to tell something about ourselves, to record something about ourselves. And in fact, we can even go further and we can express and explore things about ourselves as well. So really, art is involved in all aspects of our lives. Think about how art affects you every day. The design of clothing, the buildings that you enter and frequent, your vehicle, your room, whether it's a dorm room or bedroom or a kitchen in a house, toys, everything. Art is everywhere, and it's really important to humankind. When we are back face to face for that portion of this class, we're going to just talk for a few minutes about this. Why is art so important in your life? Where do you find it? Where do you use it? Where do you encounter it? And also, how does art affect your life? Think about your clothing. How did you choose to wear what you're wearing right now today? Look around the room that you're in. Look at the decorations that you have either put in your room or in your car, even the outside of your car. Do you decorate with some kind of stickers? How about your iPad or your laptop? A lot of folks try to decorate it in different ways. So we see it all over, but how does it affect you? What kind of effect does it have on you, your feelings, and your thinking? According to some researchers, art is a tool for thinking and for inquiry. In other words, art is a way that you can take something that you're thinking and you can make it visible, make it tangible. So if there's a theory, you can display it. You can show your emotions. You can represent them. And in the process, when you create the artwork, you can then explore your emotions more. Art can help you see things in a new way and show you new perspectives. And also, art could assist you in studying properties, things that exist in our physical world, which is a very good thing to do with our young children. It is generally accepted that there are at least 3 different approaches to art in schools. Number 1 is the non-interventionist way of approaching art. In other words, a teacher provides materials to students. A teacher helps students learn how to use those materials and nurtures and mentors them as they experiment and as they explore with those materials. Along the way, the teacher can help the students learn principles of art and, and different aspects of art to incorporate into their personal artwork. The belief here is that children will naturally develop artistic skills if they're in an encouraging and an enriching environment. Now, exploration is important, but if we're going to have our children use art as a tool for thinking and inquiry and communication, then we may need to do also a little bit more, and we'll consider that in a moment. But the bottom line here with non-interventionist is that the teacher encourages and allows students to freely explore. By contrast, many of us have experienced the second approach to art, and that is the product-oriented approach. And by this we mean that the teacher will show some art project, and then the students are supposed to follow and mimic and model whatever the teacher has shown them. Now, many times in schools, which also includes in Sunday school and in church activities, we've experienced teachers planning holidays and doing different crafts, and the students typically enjoy that. But when we look at the artistic aspect of this, crafts and this product-oriented approach, focusing on what the end product should look like, they typically tend to stifle creativity as well as cognitive and artistic growth of children. So because of that, this approach of focusing on the craft or the product only, and here's the ideal that it should look like, and just follow the teacher's example, is considered by some to be developmentally inappropriate. Now, what's nice about this approach is that it's very easy to assess how children are doing, because you compare the product that you as the teacher have made, and then you look at how the children are doing. Did they copy it? Did they do it correctly? But again, there's some negatives in there, and it tends to stifle growth and very much creativity. A third approach that we've already hinted at is accepted by many as another valid and positive approach to art, and that is art as inquiry. In other words, teachers can work with children to actively investigate. So, in other words, the art is viewed as a language, and it's a language that communicates thoughts and ideas and feelings, and then students can share thoughts that they have. They can then look at that artwork and explore and go a little deeper in terms of what the content is all about. If following this approach, teachers find that children typically deepen their knowledge about different artistic techniques as well as the content itself. The National Association of Education of Young Children, known as NAEYC, looks at art this way. They say we're either as teachers focusing on the product or on the process. So product-focused art experiences give children instructions to follow. This is the craft way of looking at things. The teacher creates a sample, and the students are supposed to copy it. And if you're teaching this way, you find that many times students will say, can you show me that model again? Can you show me the sample? Because it's assumed that there's a right way and a wrong way to create the artwork. There's a very specific finished product that students can have in mind when they're starting the artwork. So it's very defined. And when it's all done, all of the children's finished artwork ideally should look relatively the same. So in this process, children can experience frustration because the teacher might look and say, oh, you've done this wrong. So let me help you fix the mistakes in your artwork. Now, by contrast, the process-focused art experience Nacy says there are no step-by-step instructions at all, and there's no sample. In fact, there's no right or wrong way. The students are going to explore, and they're going to create. The art is focused on the experience and also on exploring the ways of performing and creating art. So the techniques, the tools, the materials. This experience tends to be relaxing and calming and peaceful and encouraging and positive for students. And it builds self-esteem because ultimately the artwork is the child's own work. So he or she truly can be proud of it when it's finished. Take a moment and think about your early experience with art. How did teachers and even Sunday school teachers, your parents, other family members, how did they introduce you to art? Was it like a teacher directed? Was it a craft? Was it something that it was told this is the way it's performed and this is the way it's supposed to look at the end? Or did you have art as a self-expression, as a way to explore artistic techniques? Was it an experience that a teacher or mentor said to you, well, how do you want it to look? And let's take a look at how we could maybe help you get there and express that. In other words, look at the media accordingly that would be appropriate. Or did you have a mix of the two? How does working with or producing art make you feel? Or if you've worked with students already, what have you experienced? How does it make them feel? What kind of effects does it have on them? And this will be significant because many times teachers end up, if we're not reflective about our own past experiences, we just end up kind of redoing what was done to us. So we'll just end up repeating the same pedagogy and the same techniques. But at this point, we can take a look at it and decide which is a better approach for us, and then how can we set about intentionally to bring that about in our classrooms. In this topic, let's consider one more thought, and that is different ways of viewing and seeing and recognizing art. Realize that there's a fundamental biological need to appreciate beauty within your surroundings. That's something that brings joy to us as human beings. We also need to focus on and express and really feel and also communicate our own emotions. So art and music and the arts in general allow us to see beauty, to communicate and experience and express our emotions. Art is a very distinctive discipline. Some people focus on art as knowledge that must be taught, and there are very specific skills and techniques. And even in our college classes, many people take art appreciation in some form, maybe by a different title, but classes that will help you appreciate the classical works of art and understand them better. And also art history. Some people like to look at art through that format, through that lens, and say, well, art has a huge history, and that tells a lot about people and technology and things of that particular context in which that artwork was produced. Looked upon from a larger point of view, for example, a country or a continent or a global view, art can really be an expression of culture. It's a way to appreciate the lives of others and to understand other peoples. And that helps to bring about unity because we start to see similarities as well as unique and special differences between different peoples. And you can also view postmodern art. And postmodern refers to the life's confusions and the fragmentations, whereas in the artwork, we take the familiar things that we know and we view them through this lens, and then they seem to appear different. They're not like taking a photograph and you're seeing realistically what the artist is looking at, but rather you're seeing a depiction, which normally also focuses on the confusions, the fragmentations, the, the things that are not certain in our lives, or things that we have different strong emotions about. As a teacher, incorporating art into your classes, it will be good for you to know the elements and the principles of art so that you can nurture your students to understand and use these elements as they create their own artwork. So let's take a look at them. Art can take many different forms. For example, in class with students, you can engage them in drawing. They can use crayons, colored pencils. They can do painting. So for our younger kids, we can work with finger paint. We can have them using a paintbrush. We could do watercolors. We can use poster paints. They can be involved in cutting and pasting, in which they use papers, scissors, and glue. We can have them doing molding or sculpture. And for that, we can use either clay or Play-Doh, or they can use plaster of Paris, or they can use some form of putty. We can also have them engaged in constructing 3D art. And for that, they can either use clay and or cardboard, styrofoam, different types of material that have been recycled, or even wood. Let's consider both the elements of art as well as the principles of art. When we're referring to the elements, we're talking about the visual components that are used in artwork. For example, color and form, line and shape and space, texture and value. When we're talking about the principles, we're talking about the ways in which an artist uses and organizes elements within a work of art. So this includes things like balance and emphasis and movement, proportion, rhythm, unity, and also variety. Let's take a better look at each of these. The first element of art is a line. A line is a one-dimensional element. And if you were to take a single point and you were to move it in space, kind of like a comet flying through space, it leaves a line. The line can be thick, it can be thin, it could be straight, it could curve, it could be jagged. A shape is a two-dimensional object, something that has both height and width. So for example, a triangle or a square could be a shape. Form is a three-dimensional object, and it displays height, width, and depth, like a cube. So we've got lines, we've got shapes, and we've got forms. Another important element of art is color. And color is made up of three different properties: hue, the value, which refers to the lightness and the darkness of the color, and also the intensity of color, which refers to its brightness. Now, there are many ways to look at color, and as you could figure, color forms a very important part of artwork. So we're going to look at that separately. So for now, we'll just define it. Texture is another element of art. Texture refers to the way that things feel or they look as if they might feel if you touch them. So in other words, they either have a particular roughness or smoothness or bumpiness to them, or the artwork is made to look like it's rough or smooth or bumpy, but it's really a flat, kind of a flat surface. Balance is an important principle of art. By balance, we're talking about the equilibrium or that feeling of stability that appears within a work of art. And two major types of balance are either symmetrical or asymmetrical. Many people feel more comfortable when they look at something that's symmetrical. For example, there's a certain type of element on the left-hand side of the artwork, and the same is on the right-hand side. And many things that we see in the real world are very well balanced. But sometimes artists will purposely make things not balanced in order to create a mood or a feeling or to express something. So balance is an important part of art. Rhythm is another important principle of art. When we talk about rhythm, similar to music, we're referring to something that indicates or kind of alludes to, gives the feeling or the impression of something moving. And of course, there is nothing moving in a static piece of artwork, but that illusion, that feeling is being created. And how do the artists create this? Well, by careful placement of elements. And you can repeat those elements in such a way that it causes like a visual tempo or a beat or a rhythm. So for example, if you look at a painting of a boat, say it's a sailboat with no wind around it, and it may appear that the boat is just sitting in a very static fashion in the middle of the water. And by contrast, another artwork has the feeling that somebody is moving quickly, either through rapids or the wind is really blowing and filling up that sail. So in the second example, the artist would have to have some elements there and repeat them and give the feeling that there's motion going on in the painting. In discussing rhythm, we also refer to another principle of art which deserves being listed in its own right, and that is repetition, which simply refers to taking the same element but then repeating that element multiple times within the same artwork for effect. Movement is another principle. Now, by movement, we're not talking about the rhythm, but rather we're talking about a principle that's of design that's used to give the feeling that the viewer's eye has to travel in a certain way through the work of art. So in other words, there's a path that you take with your eye to travel through as you look at that work of art. That's that feeling of that principle of movement. And finally, the principle of harmony. And harmony, as we use it in non-artwork uses, is very similar in the art world. It's elements that are combined to work well together. And we use them in artwork to emphasize their similarity. It's pleasing. There's wholeness there. It's like friendly. Things work well together. And we can achieve harmony in a number of different ways, but it's a major principle of creating artwork. An important element of art is color. So let's deal with this separately. Let's now focus on the basics of color. The first person to assemble a color wheel or a circular diagram of colors was Sir Isaac Newton in the 1600s. He created the color wheel, and it allows you, because it's so organized, to see groupings of colors and determine which ones are harmonious together and which ones might clash together. Let's take a look at some of the fundamentals of color theory. So here we're going to look at primary colors. Now notice these are not the RGB for screens and using light, the additive colors. We're looking here at primary colors as if you were doing something on paper. So primary colors are those that cannot be formed by mixing any other color. When you take these three colors, the primary colors, you can then form all other colors by combining these three. You probably remember as a child the excitement of discovering that mixing blue and yellow make green. Well, that's known as a secondary color. The secondary colors are formed by taking the primary colors and mixing them together. So we can make green, we can make orange, and we can also make purple, all the basic colors from those primary colors. Going back to childhood, one of the exciting things as a kid is getting that box of 64 crayons. How do you form all those other colors? Well, the tertiary colors are formed by taking the secondary colors and mixing them. So we won't quite get 64 at this point, but we get yellow-orange, and we get red-orange, and so on. So how does a designer of an interface set out to select colors that are harmonious together? How do you as a person select colors for the outfits that you're going to wear every day? Well, instead of just kind of doing it by eye or by feel, there are several different ways we can look at the color wheel to help us make these determinations. The first way that we can consider this is by looking at analogous colors. In other words, colors that sit next to each other on the color wheel. If you choose colors that are by each other, you'll find that these colors are harmonious. They work well together and are pleasing to the eye. In this example, you can see darker brown, a lighter tan, and red. Those three colors sit next to each other on the color wheel, and they're analogous. So this tends to be more pleasing to our eyes. Here we're using those same three colors in a different way. We're using them as the background design of this slide, and also using two of the colors for text. Notice that these colors work well together and are more pleasing to the eye. All three of these colors sit next to each other on the color wheel, and therefore we call them analogous colors. A second way to view the colors that are located on the color wheel is to look across the wheel. Look at the colors that are opposite of each other. These are known as complementary colors. They're opposite one another, and they tend to make high contrast. So whether you're doing some graphic design, or if you're placing text over a background color, if you use complementary colors, you can create high contrast, and the colors are brighter and more vivid to the eye. In this graphic, you can see the use of two complementary colors. This tan and this blue lie across from each other. They're opposite from one another on the color wheel. Notice how that leaf stands out. It's vivid, it's bright, or artists many times say, or also fashion folks will talk about a color really having pop. That's how you can pop a color, by using complementary colors. On this slide, I'm using the same two colors. Notice how the text can pop out of the background and serve as a good contrast visually to the background. A third way that you could utilize and look at this color wheel is by creating what we call a color triad. In other words, create an equilateral triangle on the color wheel, and you'll find that the triangle will point to three different colors. So they're not across from each other, they're not next to each other. Now they're in very unique position in relation to each other in terms of this triangle. And if you do this, you can create color schemes that really have a lot of life to them, a lot of pop to them, and they work well together. In this example, in this graphic, you're seeing the use of three different colors, and they were formed by creating a triangle or a color triad superimposed over the color wheel. On this slide, you can see the same technique being employed here. I'm using a color gradient that's using two of the colors And the third color, the red, is being employed as the color of the font. Notice they work well together. They complement each other. It's pleasing. It's harmonious. So by using these three different methods of viewing colors on a color wheel, you can be more scientific about the ways in which you select colors for use in an interface. Now let's turn our focus to why and how we should expose children to artwork. Researchers strongly suggest that early childhood educational programs should really expose children to artwork. If you think about it, if a child wants to learn how to speak a language well, it would really be ideal if the child was immersed in that language. Likewise with art, if a child is going to learn how to use the elements and principles of art, how to express and convey feelings and emotions, and all the various things we've talked about through artwork, the child really needs to be exposed to different types of artwork and a lot of fine artwork. So researchers suggest using reproductions to expose children to great masterpieces of art, taking field trips to local museums, or to do this virtually, providing access to a classroom art center in which children get to choose what they're going to do. Let them choose their own topics. Let them choose the various media that they're going to work with in order to express information about those topics. And also, it's very important to display children's artwork in some form. For example, maybe in a classroom gallery, or in the hallway right outside of your classroom, or to maybe accomplish this in some digital fashion. And also, it's very important to involve families within the art program. Two researchers have suggested 4 steps that a teacher can take in using fine art prints in his or her classroom. Step 1, they suggest introduce the artwork to the students, and do this by telling the name of the artwork as given by the artist. State the name of the artist. Tell whether the artwork, or discuss with them, is realistic or if it's an abstract work of art. And if it's abstract, it requires more imagination on the part of the viewer to interpret that. The second step they suggest is to ask students to tell you what they see. So discuss the artwork with them. Focus on elements as the subject matter, the size, the objects that are used, the patterns that they see, activities, actions, things that are going on in the artwork, and colors. Remember that there are no wrong answers because everyone views art in a unique way and interprets it differently. Go a step further and ask them, if you could name this and rename this artwork, what would you call it? Because artwork is an expression from an artist, the third step suggested by the researchers is to share information about the artwork itself and also the artist. And then you can even add your own viewpoints, your own insights to stimulate further discussion. And the fourth and final step suggested is to relate the artwork to the activity that you're doing, the content that you're studying. Because in our case, we're not teaching art, we're not teaching music. We're integrating the arts into our courses. We're integrating and enhancing content that we're already teaching. So after discussing how the artwork relates to the activity in which you're going to have the students engage, then post that artwork so they can refer to it and they can see it. The artwork should support the content of your class. There are many online sources of fine art. One really easy one to remember is art.com. Here you can view and you can also purchase art prints from many artists. Let's take a closer look at this site. Art.com is a source of many fine artworks. Keep in mind that not only can you view them here, but you can also purchase prints at reasonable costs for use with your students in your classes. So we can see the various categories. Here we can go to bestsellers and notice that we're seeing different art movements here, like Art Deco, Cubism, Impressionism, modern art, Surrealism. In our course, we're going to take a brief overview of many of the art movements throughout art history. You can also view famous artists and also the work of some newer artists. You can shop by subject. You can also look by color. So as you go through, say I would like to look at some Surrealism. Then I can view, and as you look through these works of art right now, you will recognize some of these famous pieces. You might not know exactly who created them, or why they created them, or when, what part of history and art history, what kind of movement were they involved in, what were they attempting to do. But you'll recognize these works of art. Keep in mind that with your students, for them to really gain a full appreciation of art and be able to express better through artwork, you really need to expose them and immerse them into a richer environment. And this is one of the sites that you can do so. So let's take a look at an example of how you could help students appreciate artwork, especially fine art. Here's a work of art. So let's start by having a little discussion with our students. The first question that the researchers suggested that we ask, or that we indicate the answer to, is this a realistic artwork, or is it an abstract? And you can see that this is an abstract work of art. It's not like a photograph taken of something where someone painted exactly what they saw. So then I'd ask the students, what do you see in this painting? And then I would ask them, if you could name this artwork, what would you name it? And then we would go on to describe the artwork and the artist, and then relate what we're looking at to the content, to what we're teaching. So then we would have a discussion about the artist and about the artwork. So this artwork is called Violin and Candlestick. Now, I would not necessarily make a slide like this and present it. I mean, I could, but the key here is to discuss and share and enrich the students' understanding about the background of both the artwork and the artist. So in this case, the artist's name is Georges Braque. And Georges Braque was born and lived in France, so the late 1800s through the mid 1900s. So he was in the 20th century. Some of his artwork was designed in a style called Cubism. So let's talk about Cubism and about that work. Cubism was one of the most influential visual art styles of the early 20th century. And we know who created the concept of Cubism, and it was Braque, along with Pablo Picasso. When we look at Cubist artwork, what the artist does is he or she takes an object, like in this case, two objects, a candlestick and a violin, and they break up the parts of it, and then they reassemble them. So kind of like making a puzzle out of it. And after the scene is broken up and divided into individual pieces, the artist then reassembles them in some abstract form. So instead of showing these objects, in this case the candlestick and the violin, from one viewpoint, as you would with a photograph or a realistic painting of those objects, the artist tries to depict that subject matter from different viewpoints at the same time. When we start our face-to-face class this week, we're going to start by looking at these two artworks, and we're going to ask those questions and hold that discussion in our class so that we can model what we would do with our students. In this case, we're looking at Pablo Picasso's Girl with a Mandolin. Now, just knowing at this point about Cubism and what it represents and what an artist painting in that style or creating in that style is trying to do, and then knowing something about the artist. In this case, Picasso was a Spanish artist. He lived late 1800s. By 1973, he had passed on, and he was studying art since he was age 7. If we can learn some different aspects of the artist's life, and then we can learn more about the painting, it can help us interpret this. Again, this is the way that we're modeling how to do this with your class. And in our face-to-face class, we're going to try it one more time, and we'll model that for you. So a quick review. In this video, we started by considering the importance of teaching art, and we looked at approaches to art, and specifically we were focusing on process versus product art experiences, and also we looked at ways of viewing art. Then we went on to consider the elements and also the principles of art, and we looked at them individually and highlighted them, and then we focused in specifically on color because it's such an important part of artwork. And then we finished by looking at exposing children to artwork. We talked about the importance of it, how to use and how to find some fine art prints, and help them to start to appreciate it and start to understand it. At our in-person class, looking ahead, we're going to start by holding a little discussion and review of the content that we presented in this video, and then we're going to do some hands-on with art activities. And we'll look at activities such as an aluminum foil sculpture, a red dot drawing inspired by different famous artists and their paintings, and finally a ripped paper flower bouquet where we don't cut, but rather we tear and we rip the paper. Hope you have a great week. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you at our next in-person class.